Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from Child Protection Party. Glad that you could be with me tonight for this particular live feed. Now there's lots that we can talk about that have occurred during the week. I guess the most important thing for us here at CPP was our AGM yesterday, and we hope that many of you were able to tune in for that, because it was just a process, I guess, that we needed to go through, but the most important part of that actually was the address, the speech by Dr. Frank Golding. If you have a chance to have a look at that, please do. It's illuminating to understand that an historian such as Frank, who himself was in care, has come to the realisation, which probably wasn't all that hard, that the system has not changed over 150 years or so. And we've had that done through other researchers in this area around foster care in particular, have come to the same conclusion, that the system for whatever reason has not changed. So I guess it's important for us to understand why that system doesn't change, what gets in the way of preventing change within the child protection system, and what is it that we can do in order to influence or to create some form of change. And one of the things I think that we can do most, actually, is the reason why we set up the Child Protection Party, is for people like yourselves to get involved with us, to become involved with at our executive level or at our state level or in some other capacity. There are still lots of positions that we're seeking to have filled at CPP, and we'd certainly appreciate any assistance that you can give us. One of the things that I guess we do need the most of, but we are a bit reluctant to continue to talk about it, is actually finances, because in order to have someone elected to Parliament to be able to implement the changes and affect change in the way that we would like, then we're going to have to spend at least $30,000 per candidate. It's just the reality of the game, I guess, but it is the way that it is. And so if you can find a way to contribute to us financially, then that would be fabulous. If you go to our webpage, there's a donate button there, and you can contribute in that way. So please become a part of the Child Protection Party where you can, and also use this opportunity that I'm, the opportunity that I'm providing at the moment to engage with us, to talk to me about the issues that are concerning you. I noticed we started off with a number of people. For some reason I'm boring and they dropped off. Such is life. But we do this every Monday night now. Every Monday night I'm coming in, I'm trying to have a conversation with you, to talk to you about the things that matter to you, so that we can develop a dialogue and discuss the issues. Now, a lot of people have issues that they place on other sites, and there's a lot of people that call us directly to have conversations with us about what they need to do around certain cases. It might be helpful here if you bring up some of those cases so that we can talk about what's happening, and I'm happy to offer whatever advice, if you want to call it that, or information that I can, according to my limited knowledge, I guess, around this subject. I don't know everything. I've been in it for a while, but I'm happy to discuss it with you. And also there are other issues that people may have which would like to be discussed around young people's mental well-being, for example. Some people may be concerned about the suicide rate of young people, because certainly we are. There may be other issues such as kids with disabilities not receiving appropriate support through NDIS, and there might be kids with learning challenges at school and are not receiving that appropriate support either. And we'd like to have those conversations with you so that we know what's going on for you. We can record those, and then we can perhaps do something about it, develop policies perhaps in any of these particular areas. And there might be some contentious areas that you're wondering how it is that we think, some of the values that we have that may be important there. Well, talk to us about those values. There are many issues which sit on the line that we haven't yet developed policies for. But whatever they might be, there are some issues that we believe we won't have policies for because they are so contentious. And if ever we got anybody into Parliament, it'd be a conscience vote for those people. The main issues that we do talk about are those around making sure that the outcomes for all kids are the best that they can be, because that's why we're here. But I had a few things that I wanted to discuss tonight, just to see how it rolls. And one of them, I know I'm getting back on this bandwagon around domestic violence, but it's not like I can let it alone. Primarily because the issue around domestic violence is one which I think just keeps looming its kind of ugly head, and it's something that we talk about a lot because domestic violence impacts kids. Clearly, where there are young people, where there are older people for that matter, but where there are children of those people that are in conflict, then that's going to be an issue for those young people, because the trauma that they're likely to experience from watching their parents or other adults in their lives being violent and abusive of each other and behaving badly is going to interrupt how they perceive their lives and the way they enact their lives later on. So this is really important to us because the statistics tell us that it's between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 families have some form of family violence. And you know, when you look at on an average 2-3 kids per family, perhaps, you know, that in this country, that's a lot. That's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children that are impacted by what's happening between the two primary caregivers in their lives. And so, but we also know that the number of people who are damaged by this is, and the damage, well, to be frank, people die because of domestic violence. And it's sad to think that on average, one woman dies each week as a result of violence in the home. And that's distressing. And there's been instances over the last few months where some of those deaths have been horrific, where kids have witnessed the parent being burnt by their partner. You know, it's hard to imagine how traumatising those events are. What we do need to consider is whether we could have done something to have prevented them, whether there could have been some form of service, some removal of the perpetrator from the home so that the other family members could have been protected, and whether or not the police do enough of that work, or whether the police are trained well enough to be able to act in those situations. There's an interesting article which I will now show you, not that one. The title, you can't read the title here, but it says "Bogus Domestic Violence Orders on the Rise as Violent Partners Seek to Silence Survivors Out of Spite." But the article, so there's this, there's a wonderful interview here as well, which is, I think, has been done by the ABC, on working with police and what the police are doing in order to assist and how they are operating as police officers around domestic violence. And in one of those cases, they did talk about, they had on one shift they had two domestic violence cases, and those 2 cases took them the whole shift. And so the violence in these places is it's using up resources within the police force, and where need be, rightfully so, not critical of that. But where it does become complicated apparently is when when the police arrive and they hear 2 sides of the story. And I've heard this before from clients I've worked with, and that is that, and look, there'll be people that'll jump on my back because I'm placing a gender into this, and it isn't intentional, it's just my experience, so don't bother, because it's a pain in the ass when you do it, and it doesn't change anything. But normally, what tends to happen is the police arrive, the woman is extremely distressed, as it says in the article, sometimes hysterical, about what's been happened. She's been assaulted. He has a scratch on his face because she's fought back or fought him off. And in the event of that, the police are left with two stories. Hysterical woman, according to him, he attacked her, and according to her, she was attacked by him. So it's, and you know, for the police officers, I can understand they can only work on what evidence that they have. They can't necessarily work on what one person says and the other person says. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's about one person saying one thing and another saying something completely different. And I think one of the interesting things that came out of this article, which I've been aware of for ages, but it's worth noting, is that sometimes we just need to have a look at the history as well. So the police now try to have a look at the history. So where there's been other DV orders against a particular individual, then of course the focus will be on that individual, as opposed to the person without the order. And where there's violence in one person's life versus the other, well then of course the focus needs to be on the person where there's the violence. So that's the nuances, I guess, of the police work. It's difficult work, it's not easy, I understand all of that, but at the end of the day, it's a tough job. But in this particular article, just want to cite some things that they point out here. This is an interesting article. So the mother of three, Jessica, cried as she recalled years of broken bones, bruises and blood pouring from her face at the hands of her husband. When she one day worked up the courage to fight back, landing a punch of her own, she ended up in court with a domestic violence order against her. How crazy is that? The 30-year-old said she was trying to protect herself during what was yet another violent attack in her regional Queensland home. It was definitely out of spite, Jessica said, recalling the order her partner took out against her after she had taken out one against him. He says he didn't feel safe around me and scared, but that is not the case at all. And I think it's worth noting here that, you know, she's a mother of three, so she's got these three kids. That were probably a party to all the noise and the racket that went on in this home and saw their mother abused. Won't go into the damage that does to kids being able to, not being able to protect their parent and wanting to, but being too young and not able to, and being confused about what was happening. So there was a review in Queensland. The review, chaired by State Coroner Terry Ryan, found the use of malicious orders was a tactic more commonly used against women and those in violent same-sex relationships. In 2016, a report also found in about 44% of all cases of female deaths, the woman had been identified as responded to a domestic and family violence protection order on at least one occasion. And they talked about the Indigenous population. You know, this is common stuff. The mum of three, Lisa, also found herself slapped with a protection order after enduring 6 years of physical, emotional, financial and sex abuse at the hands of her violent ex-partner. Lisa said he would arrive at her home unannounced and threatened to take the children from school, saying, "I will never see them again." Lisa said her then partner took the order out against her in an attempt to keep control and paint her behaviour as a bad... You know, and I've seen that... Look, there will be guys out there, and I know of one particular guy, if he ever watches this video, he'll lose his shit. And I understand that because for some reason you can't mention that there are occasions, you have to mention somehow that women are also violent. Yes, there are women who are violent, but the statistics tell us something completely different. And look, I've got a client at the moment, obviously I can't mention his name or anything or any of the greater details, but a burly, busty, brute of a guy, big guy, who there's no doubt that his partner's brutal toward, or ex-partner. He didn't have much of a relationship with her but had a child, which means it went up in the family court. But there's no doubt that he does everything to remain calm. And I tell you what, I sit there listening to his stories and read some of the things this woman sends him, and I think, how have you remained calm? And in his instance, because of the way he looks and the type of work that he does, no one can believe that there can be a woman who could assault a man of his stature and whatever. And so when I think of, people having a go at me because I'm citing these cases, his case is rare. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there can't be cases where, and I know that there are, where men are emotionally and psychologically abused by women. The majority of cases, though, 80-90% of them, are about men demonstrating coercive control, other forms of control over women, so that they can get whatever it is that they want, which is control over her, and to be able to manipulate her. And I'll tell you, I've been doing DV, I've been in the DV area for about 30 years, and I still don't understand the logic of it all, because clearly, if you're going to abuse somebody and control them, and they're threatening to leave and eventually leave, continuing that control is not going to enhance your position at all, I can assure you. But we need to do more work around that, obviously. And yes, that was the other point they raised, which is of interest, is that she says here that it would, I knew it was a breach of the protection order, it would go onto my criminal record. It would inflict my employment and future job and affecting child-related custody procedures. And if there are kids involved, this is a ploy that some men will use in order to get the control that they need over their partner and use it within the family court. So I just wonder what else to say. It's common for a perpetrator to ring police to say, oh, that's right. So there's this bit here which I thought was interesting. It is common for a perpetrator to ring police and say, she has just attacked me. Now, I know of countless cases where that's exactly what's happened. So a woman's become so, for years they've put up with the abuse, right? And eventually they say, well, enough's enough. So he comes at her, sometimes for the last time, I think, and she says, bugger it, I don't care what happens now, I'm just going to fight back. So pulls out whatever she's got handy and throws it at him and yells at him, and he sits back in bewilderment because perhaps this is the first time she's fought back. And as a result, he then believes he's the one being threatened, forgetting that, for years and years and years he's threatened this woman, done a whole host of other things. That also goes out of the window because there's no way in the world these guys take responsibility for what they've done in the past, and suddenly she's the aggressor. So then they make the phone call. In this instance, she has been the aggressor, and bingo, she's got a DVO placed against her, and it could impact the rest of her life. Take it to the family court judge, who are a bit of, well, we won't go into who they are and why they are the way they are, but they make the craziest decisions, are likely to see it in his favour, and she loses the kids because on this one occasion she lost it with him because she did it with the violence. So, and then someone else raised one of the other issues is, we hear, well, why doesn't she leave? Well, if you know anything about domestic violence, you know why they don't leave. And there's I think it was in this particular one, they did have a video of this woman who explained that over the years he had taken everything from her. He had taken their friends, her relationships with her family. He had ripped her of everything that she had. And that in the event of leaving, she had nowhere to go. So she was stuck, trapped by this guy, because over the years that's the way he'd constructed it. That's the reason why people don't leave, is where do I go? And the other one I hear so often is, well, I believe that he will change. You've been with him I was working with someone not long ago, I've been with someone for 20 years. He hasn't changed in any of that time, but she was still holding on to that belief that he would. And he was still violent and abusive, but she still believed that he would change. No, I'm sorry, but people have got to want to change to start with, and he clearly didn't want to change, and he's been given all the opportunities under the sun, and he's chosen not to. So, and they're all the reasons why people stay, and they become dependent upon. So it's a bit like Stockholm Syndrome. They become so dependent upon being the captive that they can't even think for themselves. And so that's why they have to stay. right? So I haven't been looking at the Facebook feed, so I don't know what's happening there. Yes, it can happen to man or woman. Yep, I knew that was going on. It happened to as a party. I don't know whether you're male or female. No disrespect for that. Yes, it can happen to both. I'm not going to argue that point. And the other thing I wanted to look at was the Hillier murder. Now, this was a story that happened in 2017, I think, and there was a time when, so I'll bring it up. So this is Steve Egbert's grandfather of Hillier triple murder victims, claims child protection workers failed his family. So we're just kind of changing tack here just slightly. And the claim here is that I'll just highlight that bit. The Crown of Two Murdered Children claims that the actions of child protection staff robbed the Hillier victims of any chance of survival and says they must be held personally accountable if the system is to improve. And this has been an issue for us at CPP forever. And that is, how do you go about holding someone like the Department of Child Protection, doesn't matter where it is, how do you hold them accountable for their inability to be able to intervene and save, in this case, 2 kids' lives? Now, if I have a reason, I think that sometimes that they argued in this case that it was about lack of resources. Well, maybe so. So I'm not going to dispute that, but the family was interviewed just days before the children and their mum was murdered. And if you had entered into this household and you knew the history of the murderer, you would have thought, well, maybe these kids are not safe. Let's remove them. Let's do an investigation. Let's see where we go from there. And you know, I've argued for years that there is an issue about the number of investigations that we do, and there is an issue about removing kids when it's unnecessary. But on the other hand, you know, we sometimes do need to remove kids to ensure that they're safe while an assessment is taking place. It doesn't mean they have to stay in long-term care. Doesn't mean that it has to be a 12-month or 2-month order, or 12-month or a 2-year order. What it does mean is that the assessment needs to be done appropriately to ensure that the kids are safe. They didn't even do that. So as a result, this madman winds up losing it and taking out 2 kids. There are 3 children. I know for a fact that one of those children survived because he happened to be live with their grandparents at the time. And why? And in this case, the grandfather was concerned because they knew of what was happening in this family, and they knew of his violence, and that there was no effort to contact them, I believe, to talk to them about what had been happening in this family. And that in itself is atrocious. And it says here further, during the inquest, staffers admitted they did not investigate mandatory reports about, oh, here we go. So there were reports about Amber Rose Rigney and her brother, Corey Lee Mitchell, blaming a lack of resources. But they did not investigate mandatory reports. So the reality is that reports were made and they decided to do nothing. So how possibly, I don't know. And no one's standing up. I don't see Rachel Sanderson or anybody else from the department, standing up and saying, we made an error of judgment. Nor the social workers who were there at the time have been sacked because they're crap. Or we've now implemented legislation that's addressing this issue. We're now making changes to practice so that we can assure that this situation will never ever happen again. Now, I guess you can't assure that because human behaviour, being what it is unpredictable. But you can put in places procedure and training to ensure that assessments are done appropriately, and where appropriately children are removed, and where it's appropriate the children remain within their family, or a person is removed if you are concerned about all of that, or you provide appropriate counselling services. You know, one of the biggest problems that we have with the child protection system is that there are so few resources, not just within the department but outside of the department, that people are not encouraged necessarily to go and look for those resources, or the department doesn't offer those resources themselves, such as domestic violence, such as counselling, such as relationship counselling, such as parenting programs. All that stuff is outsourced, and parents are told to go and find those resources. You know, I think one of the things that we looked at years ago at the Child Protection Party was like a hub. So there was this place where people could go and all of these services would be offered. So let's think of university campus, or something much smaller obviously, but that sort of idea where people can go and even live and deal with and face and confront some of the issues that have been there in their lives, so that they can then leave that with a set of tools that's going to help them to manage their life differently in the future. This is something that we don't do. This is something which is, I guess, a bit more creative. Probably costs a few $1 million to set all of it up. But if it saves lives, who cares? You know? And it could. It could. We don't have enough shelters for women that are leaving care. I had a client leaving their violent husbands. I had a client call me a few weeks back who just couldn't find a place and couldn't find a service that would help her. And the Housing Trust in South Australia was reluctant to find her a place as well, even though the situation she was leaving was extremely violent and she had 4 kids. So I've often said funding isn't the problem, because it isn't. It helps, but it's not the total problem right across the board. Doesn't matter whether it's around mental well-being for kids, disabilities, learning disabilities, whatever it might be. The problem is actually finding the right people to do the right job. We could, for example, in the Hillier case, we could have given them X amount of dollars. Well, we could argue that there were no issues around resources. It still doesn't mean those kids would not have died, because the social workers were inadequate enough. That's not about resources. Like, think about it. How difficult is it to go into a situation, see what you see, hear what you hear, listen to the stories that are told, look at all the notifications, and for people who have been practicing social work for a while, there's a thing called practice wisdom, which comes with a heck of a lot of experience, and it's that gut feeling you have. So it's nothing you can put your finger on. It's just a gut feeling that things are not right here, or that the gut feeling I often have is, I don't think I've been told the full truth here, and I need to ask some further questions to explore this further. You know, so that is missing from a range of services where the department believes that because I toss money at it, that's going to solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem. I'm not saying it doesn't assist in relieving some of the issues, because if you're able to employ more people to do the job, hopefully you would have more people that were that had this practice wisdom, that were able to do the job appropriately, or who were better informed about how to work within certain environments. But you don't, because the department at the end of the day is reluctant to admit that any of their social workers are crap. And I had this one issue with a social worker for some time, and I've made 3 or 4 complaints. She's the worst of the worst. Yet she's still there, affecting people's lives, impacted them to the point whereby, and I have one case where just last week the father gave up, basically, because, and he's a great person, really nice man, had a shitty last few years, but he's turned his life around. And he gave up in the end because he wanted to take it to court, but legal aid wouldn't fund him. Another issue. There's an issue that would be solved by money. But you see, we don't care enough about children to implement processes and funding strategies that are going to alleviate the system. That is the problem. We do not care enough about kids for us to be able to make a difference. So I'll just have a wander back here. Oh, people. Wendy says it's very well explained in anthropology. It is. The woman who gives birth, she knows she is the mother, but with the father, this can be in doubts. This doubts can be, the mother gives birth to a child, definitely the mother. But if she's had a number of relationships prior to that, the father perhaps is in question. So true. And yeah, Paul, look, I don't want to go over this again, particularly with you, Paul. I don't know why we need to say that. We don't need to justify that there are men who are in DV relationships. The men that do that are the ones who themselves usually are perpetrators of domestic violence. It's like that conversation. I get really hot under my collar over this because it's like that conversation that we had earlier about men who suddenly get attacked by this woman after they've been attacking and assaulting her for years, and then they register a complaint. So the first thing I always think of when men step forward and say, well, there are women who are violent, I've already said yes, there are. But men that must make that claim often themselves are also violent. They are. I'm not suggesting every one of them. Don't get your knickers in a knot. But I'll tell you what, if you're a guy making that claim and defending men, saying that there are women, whatever, just consider the fact that look in your own backyard and consider whether or not you yourself may have behaved in ways that were unhelpful. And if you are a male who is in a violent or damaging relationship and still are, ask yourself why. Maybe then you'll understand the woman's perspective as well, because it's much the same. So if you've been in a DV relationship as a male, that is, you are the victim, then maybe you should start to consider what it is also like for women, who in many ways, financially and otherwise, physically, are more vulnerable than men. In fact, I would argue that if a male is putting forward this argument, well, it happens to men as well. If a male is putting forward that argument, then they should be the most empathetic people in relation to what's happening to women. But if you're not, if you have no empathy for what's happening for women, then you are just as bad as those men who perpetrate the violence. I'm telling you. Well, Leslie, it's good to see you there. Oh, thanks, Deb. So Deb says, after 40 odd years as a social worker, I can attest that I continually get gut feelings. It comes with it, like, yeah, I don't disagree with you, Deb. That it does come with life experience. And that's why I say when I talk about professional wisdom, that is because you've got to have that experience. But sometimes a lot of the stuff that we need to do in social work is is also innate. It is about who we become as well, which isn't quite the same as innate, but I think you know what I mean. And it's about empathy, and it's about recognising when the system is asking you to do something that you believe is unethical or not in complete, not completely in line with practice. So I won't give a talk about social work, but certainly, Deb, I do agree with you on that issue. And Tony says, thanks, Tony. I agree with you, Tony. Thank you, Tony. Majority who make the DV claim are themselves projecting blame. They are, and it's just the way it is. So you guys that are doing that, go for it. Do it. Have fun. But just remember, at the end of the day, you are actually talking probably more about yourself than about the other person. And I think it'd be interesting if most of us just recognise that that's what you're doing. You're just complaining about other people. And so anyway, so there's one final thing that I wanted to have a look at, which looks like this might become a... there's two things actually. I'm consuming a lot of time. I've already done 37 minutes. I'll try to keep it to 40. So this was an interesting article. This was also from the ABC, our trusted news service. And I might need to have to resort that into the page here somewhere. Bear with for a second while I just... I don't know if I can tell you. I'll bring up whatever I can. Okay. So in this one it says, dying young up to 5 times more likely among kids known to Child Protection Services. This is a University of South Australian study. I don't know what I'll be able to read down. Oh yeah, it's okay. Children known to Child Protection Services in South Australia are up to 5 times. I think that's a massive figure. Up to 5 times more likely to die by the age of 16 than those with no concerns, according to new research. The University of South Australia study compared the cause of death of more than 1,635 children born in the state between 1986 to... Gee, that's a lot of kids. And Leonie Siegel, who's leader of this team, says too many children are suffering, too many children have become a statistic. And after adjusting for socio-economic factors, children known to Child Protection Services still had 3 to 4 times the risk of death before turning 16 because of maltreatment, including neglect and child abuse, the study showed. So when we look at some of this stuff, you've got to think, how relevant is the Child Protection Party? Hey? How relevant are we when the issues which are presented are so stark that kids die? Kids die because we as a society are unable to protect them. That's what it amounts to. We fail our kids every day. Every day. Somewhere, somehow, we as a society, we fail them because we do not care enough about them. And at CPP, we're trying to change that. We're trying to get people involved with us to have the discussions that we're having now so that we can potentially make a difference. And this is about kids that are, so it goes on to say, even children reported to services through less serious channels, such as a teacher, I don't know what they mean by less serious, I said that, but such as a teacher or health professional raising concerns, had almost 3 times the risk of death, Professor Siegel said. Even when we don't really know what's going on and it's not clear, it's serious. So I think what she's referring to are family members making notifications, DV services maybe making notifications, people that are actually talking to the people where there are direct issues. So the indirect notifications through teachers and others where they don't exactly see what's happening, that's 3 times. So it's still far more than what it should be. it was a surprise to us that even concerns that had been escalated, the children could still be at risk. So, and it does go on to say, interestingly enough, that kids who return home most at risk. The research found the group most at risk of dying prematurely was children reported using more serious channels whose circumstances warranted out-of-home care but had been returned home. That's a concern. That should be a concern to all of us. So children can go into care for a period while investigators gather more information or while the parents have an opportunity to demonstrate they can provide a safe environment for that child. But it's often very difficult to know what is going on, and circumstances can change. So a child might be returned home and something might change. And that's the risk aversion stuff. You know, like, how do we know where a child has been authentically removed and the issues have been resolved? Again, it comes back to what work has the parent done, how have we had conversations with them, how do we know? I was working with a guy, I've been working with for a few years, eventually the kids were taken away from him on a long-term order, and he had, if you sat down with him and had a conversation, there's no way in the world this guy would ever harm these kids, no way in the world that they were primarily taken away from him because of his ex and her behaviours. And there were some allegations made against him, but when you hear the reasons for that, you kind of understand what was going on. But there is no, and he's done heaps and heaps of work. There is no way these kids would be damaged while in his care. They're being damaged while in resi care and foster care. And one of the kids has already had 10, 11 removals from one foster, residential care, foster family after foster family. How damaging is that? And then we need to consider that if a kid's left, has been sent home, what damage is done to them by being removed and they've been in care anyway? Because some of these kids, you know, I know of a child that's in residential care and it's traumatic for her. There's abuse, there's sexual assault, the police are there every day. It's a nightmare. And that sort of stuff wouldn't be happening in her home, but it happens in residential care. You know, so when we're looking at these statistics that these people have brought out, well, I can tell you that part of the problem is not the fact that they're being just returned home, it's just they've been traumatised while being in care. But yep, we don't seem to have that addressed. Now, there was another one here that I think, oh, this is the one. And I better turn that off. So this is another issue, and I'll just finish on this, and then I'll leave everybody to their thing. But this was tech-addicted kids. So this is another area of concern which clearly needs to be addressed. I'll just move that over. And this is where gaming becomes obsessive. And I worked within the gambling rehab program for a number of years, and I know the impact that these machines can have. And this article actually talks about what those impacts are, and that the gaming industry understands how to attract children to get them locked into having to play their games all the time. And some kids apparently are taking their parents' credit cards and buying games, and we know that, I know from my own personal experience with one of my children, being frustrated at the game and throwing crap against the wall and damaging mice and doing a lot of other things, is just par for the course. But I know that that the impact that it has on parents is extreme. When you've got a kid that's normally quite placid and reasonable, and then they're exploding every now and again, in what appears to be violent ways, then that is a concern to us as parents. And I also know that the idea of providing short-term but small and minor rewards to people, which is apparently now what gaming are doing, so they provide a small reward, keeps you locked in, hoping that you're going to get the large reward. So in a poker machine, in a gaming machine, at a gaming venue, you will be given a few dollars back, but ultimately, you know, you're going to lose, you will lose all your money because that's the way it goes. In terms of game machines, they want to be able to entice you to believe that at some point you're going to win. Now that leads to not just gaming itself as being an issue and the frustration and resentment and the anger that builds up inside of kids. What it leads to is gambling later on. So these kids are being set up so that they will become gamblers later on in life. And I think this is atrocious. So they're stealing credit cards and, I won't go into that. Kids are vulnerable and they're being exploited by big tech. Okay, so what's new? We're all being exploited by big tech, pharmaceutical companies. Everybody's exploiting us. The thing that we need to do is understand how they're doing it and why they're doing it, not buy their products when need be. So I just want to say thanks for everybody for tuning in at some point for this rant. All right, so Deb says grandchild. Yeah, and they do the play up. Yep, get that. Thanks, Deb. Leslie, replying to Sean. Yeah, we can store it. We did do a session some time back on adoption, so you may have missed that. But if you wish to have a further, if you want to come on and have a conversation like this and link up with us, then I'm prepared to organise all of that for you. So just contact me at tony.tonkin@childprotection.party or contact avery.hilditch@childprotection.party, and either one of us can get back to you and negotiate a time to come on. We're organising a number of interviews next week so that certain people can come on and talk about their issues. We're more than happy to do that. There is a dude out there though who is a horrible man who objects to the fact that I won't let him come on. And the reason why I won't is because you're horrible. You're a terrible human being. He'll know who he is, and I don't want to be confronted or manipulated by crap and individuals who are just terrible. I have enough of that working with sometimes just with the child protection system and other systems that are not working appropriately. So hope you got something out of tonight's live feed. I'd just like you to, if you're on YouTube, can you subscribe, ring the bell, let us know that if you want further notifications, and stay tuned for next week when we'll catch up with you on this live feed. And if there's an issue that does arise during the week, I'll try to do some impromptu live feeds. If there's a subject that you want to talk about specifically, then let us know and we will have a conversation with you. Look after yourselves, everybody. Take care, and more importantly, be safe.